Alright, what's going on? My name's Louie, and today I want to talk to you guys about some of the ins and outs of muskie fishing along the Fox River. I want to cover a couple important topics like locations, lure selection, tackle, as well as providing a couple of miscellaneous tips along the way that should help you guys catch more fish from the river. Now, the goal with this video is to really try and go beyond the basics and to tailor a lot of this fishing information to river muskies, but more specifically, the muskies within the Fox River in Illinois. And I'm going to do my best to condense all this information as much as possible, keep things nice, clean, and concise. However, some of these topics might get a little bit lengthy. Stick with me though, because I'm going to, like I said, do my best to provide as much quality information as possible that you guys can use as, if not a starting point, some sort of guideline or framework to catch more fish. Alright. All that being said, let's actually jump into this. So on this table I have in front of me, I have some of my favorite muskie baits for the Fox River. However, none of these lures are going to do you any good if you don't know where the muskies are within the river for that time of year. So let's start things out by talking about muskie spots and what makes a good muskie spot. So, to find the best locations along the river for these muskie, you have to keep in mind a couple key things about this fish's behavior and its preferences. Now, I want to avoid going into a full-on biology lesson here. However, these are a couple of the key points to keep in mind when chasing after these fish in the river system. So starting out, I guess it's important to note that muskies are one of the dominant predatory species, if not the top dominant predatory species within the river. And what does that mean for you and I as anglers? Well, typically, your top predator is going to take the best location or the best ambush point that it can find. A really good example of this is actually not with fish, but with grizzly bears. Have you ever watched on like Discovery Channel or Animal Planet when the salmon are coming in stream to spawn? You have all these grizzly bears gather around the river systems where they start wading into the river to find rocks or little thresholds to stand on to try and ambush these fish as they're coming upstream. Well, your top dog, your top biggest alpha bear, is going to get the best rock or spot along that river. As a result, he pushes the smaller bears somewhere else, and he has the best ambush spot. Well, back in Illinois, when we're chasing these muskies, under the water, it's a very similar concept as that. Your biggest muskie, the top predator, is going to take the best ambush spot. And as a result, he pushes the smallmouth bass and the walleye somewhere else. So, what does that best spot actually look like in the river? Well, let's talk about those points. There's basically 5 or 6 really important things to know year-round, and one of them is bait. But that's just kind of a given, and I don't want to go too deep into the weeds on bait. But basically, if there's not little tiny bait fish for the predator to eat, he's not going to be there. But more important than bait is current, structure, depth changes, water temperature, and water clarity. These 5 things really dictate year-round where the muskie are going to be and where you're going to find them. Let's break down each one of these points and discuss how it relates to the muskie's preferences. We're going to start off with current. Now, muskies tend to avoid areas of heavy current, and they much prefer current breaks. Classic examples of this along the river are current seams, where you have fast water near still water, backwater eddies, where you have the current kind of going in the opposite direction as the main river flow, and still water areas, where you're going to find a lot of your lily pads. Those are all classic river spots. The next big point that I want to talk about is structure. And structure relates very heavily to what I'm talking about in current, because it oftentimes provides the current breaks that the muskies are looking for. But, like all ambush predators, muskies relate very strongly to structure. And the structure that I'm talking about in a river can look like a lot of things. Classic spots look like fallen trees in the river, big river rock, big boulders, undercut river banks, and bridge pilings. Those are all really good spots to look at. The next point that dictates where a muskie would be is depth changes. Now, muskies relate very strongly to depth changes, and throughout the course of the day, they're going to be in different areas. Ideally, what you're looking for in the river is areas that have deep water near shallow water. Again, classic spots are going to be like your deep river holes with slower current, drop-off areas, or even the break line between the main river channel and like a shallower flat. Moving along to the next 2 points are actually about the water itself. Muskies are a borderline cold water species, which means they don't really do too well in warmer water. They much prefer to be in like water temps between 60 and 70 degrees, and they're going to do everything in their power to stay within that zone as long into the year as they possibly can. Alright, the next point that I want to talk about is actually water clarity. And this is a topic I don't hear discussed nearly enough, but it's equally important, if not more important, than a lot of these other factors. Ideally, what you're looking for in water clarity is like a moderate cleanliness. 2 to 3 foot of visibility is ideal. The reason being is muskies are primarily a visual feeder and a visual hunter. If you have super clear, clean water, that fish can see your bait from a longer distance away and analyze it without getting itself all worked up to actually strike the bait. Unless you're doing everything absolutely perfectly, clear water is often the times when you have a muskie follow your bait and then pull off, simply because it doesn't look like a real thing that the fish wants to eat. On the flip side of that coin, if you have extremely dirty water where the river's blown out and it's almost like chocolate milk, it's extremely hard to even get your bait noticed to where the fish is even going to see it and be able to track it and hunt it. Okay, so those are more or less a SparkNotes version of the points that dictate where muskies are going to be in the river. But what does it actually look like when you get to the riverbank? So keeping all those points in mind, where can you actually go along the river to find these fish? And that really is the million-dollar question, and that's going to depend on where you live and a couple other factors, but it's basically your responsibility as the angler to get out there, do some exploring, and try and find some of your spots for yourself. But if you're looking for just an overall starting point, I mean, basically every river town along the entire Fox, especially the Illinois section below the chain of lakes, has a dam or spillway. And these dams and spillways are great places to start simply because they hold a lot of bait and offer a lot of the different structural opportunities very close to each other that we just talked about. The problem with the dams and spillways is they are really heavily pressured, and you got a lot of anglers that fish there that don't necessarily have the best etiquette, and it's kind of a pain just to deal with some other anglers. The other problem, and probably the bigger concern, is these areas are extremely snaggy. And none of these musky lures are cheap by any means, and the bottom of the river in these areas just loves to eat these musky baits and claim them for their own. So what I would actually recommend is moving downstream quite a ways from those spillway areas and trying to identify some spots that incorporate some of those things that we just talked about and try and find some newer, less pressured water for yourself. Another great example of a starting point spot is in the mouth of a small feeder creek that dumps into the main river. These areas oftentimes hold a lot of bait as well, and in the mouth usually carve out a deeper hole where other bigger predatory species like to hang out. So, that being said, there's multiple different areas along the river where muskies can and will hold up, and that's where we're going to talk about lures. Each one of these lures is designed to work in a specific setting, and while some of them might be more versatile than others, not a single one of these lures here is going to work in every single spot. Alright, so let's talk about each one of these lures that I have out in front of me and why I like them and what makes them efficient on the Fox River in Illinois. Now, one thing I want to point out right out of the gate is none of these lures are very large, especially for musky fishing standards. Certainly nowhere near the size of baits that I would throw in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan. A lot of these baits are between like 3.5 to 6 inches, maybe 7 inches is like the biggest. The reason for that is a lot of the fish in the Fox where I'm at tend to be in that 30 to 38 inch size range. There are a few fish over 40, and there's certainly some in the low to mid 40s. However, the ones over 40 inches are much rarer, and if you catch one of those, I mean, congratulations, you've done something very special, and you caught a rare fish. So it's much more effective to throw these baits around 5-6 inches size, simply because that's what the fishery allows you to catch. Now, like I said before, none of these baits are going to work in every setting, and they're basically tools to do a job in a specific location. Okay, so let's start things off with some topwater baits. Now, I don't really feel the need to go into necessarily brands or makes and models of all these different things or colors, but more or less just provide a category and a framework of things that I like and things that have been effective. Now, I have 3 different style topwater baits here. And I'm going to list them out from my least favorite but still effective to my most favorite and most effective. So let's start with my least favorite but still works. I have here, it's just a whopper plopper, a chopper style bait. Basically this back tail section of the bait spins and makes a nice plop. This definitely catches a lot of fish, but tends to get a lot of pike and smallmouth more so than muskie. Additionally, a lot of people fish this style of topwater bait in the river, and I just feel that a lot of the fish have seen this style of bait before and know not to hit it. Additionally, it's very aggressive with its plopping sound, and oftentimes spooks more fish for me than actually catches. The fish have to be in a very aggressive mood, I found, to have this work. That's why it's number 3 on my topwater list. Number 2, and it's very fun to fish on a slow day, is this flat tail. It's basically a more subtle topwater. It doesn't make quite as loud noise as the Chapo style bait, and it just has this little metal blade on the back that flaps and hits some metal pins, and overall just a more subtle bait. By far the most effective topwater style that I've had is the spook style. Basically this is zigzagging on the top of the water, drawing a lot of commotions, and you can work it very slowly, especially around some bridge pilings and some fallen trees, and it really can aggravate a muskie to strike your lure pretty quickly and pretty aggressively. A lot of fun, by far best topwater bait that I have. So moving on to the next style of bait that is very effective in the Fox River is your minnow style twitch bait. Now, these are more or less all fished the exact same way, where short pumps of the rod make this bait twitch and then slowly float up, and twitch down and slowly float up. Depending on the water conditions that we have, I have a couple different colors here, but I basically go with a more natural color in sunny or clear conditions, and a more fire tiger, miller perch style in cloudy or darker water conditions. And depending on the day, dictates kind of what works best, but there's been several big fish caught on a minnow twitch style bait, especially in early spring, especially in the mouth of feeder creeks. Yeah, so the next style of bait that I think is extremely effective, and probably my most effective style of lure, is what I consider a dive and rise bait. Basically, I'm taking a lure like this shallow shad wrap and fishing it down until it hits bottom and letting it float back up, and fishing it down until it hits bottom and floating it back up. It's extremely effective around big rocks and works well in the current, doesn't get blown out. Another one that's in that same vein is like a suic or this this dive and rise twitch bait. It just has a nice curly tail, which I thought was neat. But again, pull it down until you hit bottom. Once you feel it hit bottom or a rock, you let it float back up, and you just repeat that process. Usually you're going to get a strike either as the bait has floated back up and you make that first twitch back down, or when you hit bottom, it's going to make a noise and really kind of irritate the fish, and you'll get bit then. But extremely effective. As you can see, I fished these probably the most. These still have some teeth marks in it, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, this style of bait is probably my favorite for the river muskies in Illinois, especially in spring and early summer. Okay, so the next style of bait that I want to talk to you about is a glide bait or a horizontal style twitch bait. We talked about the minnow style twitch bait, and that kind of twitches down in an erratic motion. This more or less tracks horizontally like this, effectively being like a walk the dog style bait, just subsurface. It's extremely effective and catches some of my biggest fish of the year. One of the reasons that I like this so much is I can work it very, very slowly near structure and really entice those bigger fish to come out and get it when they're not necessarily in a very active mood. One thing that you got to be careful of with this bait is it does sink. So if you're in an area that has really snaggy rock or snaggy logs, I would try throwing some sort of buoyant floating bait first before this, simply because these are a little bit more expensive and it's a real heartbreak when you lose one of these. Alright, so the next category of baits that I have here is actually lipless crankbaits. Now, lipless crankbaits are really a classic river bait year-round. You catch a lot of different species on them, like walleye and smallmouth and pike. But I find that these really excel in the cold water months, especially in the heart of winter. And the way I like to fish these is light pops off the bottom. If you notice, there's rattles in here. They can make a really aggressive sound. In the winter, you're really not trying to rip this hard and make a ton of noise. It's just a little off the bottom. And oftentimes, you're going to get bit on this when it's just sitting on the bottom, really not doing anything. It does make you nervous because fishing this so close to the bottom with treble hooks means you are going to snag up and you will lose some of these baits. But if you fish this in the deeper holes, especially in winter, you're going to get bit, and you're going to get bit by a lot of different species. And don't be surprised if you get a flathead catfish on this as well. Some of my biggest flathead catfish have come on this style of lure. Okay, and then the final section of lures that I want to talk about is your spinner baits. And there's two main styles of spinner baits that typically get used in musky fishing. You have your classic bucktail or your inline spinner, such as this style of bait here. And you have more of like your classic spinner bait, which is like a safety pin style that's pretty common with bass fishing. For whatever reason, I have not done well with an inline spinner in the Fox River in Illinois. I don't know what the reasoning is. I truly don't. You go up to Wisconsin or Michigan, and this is one of the top producing lures in your bag. I've had a lot of luck, though, on the Fox River, especially around areas of heavy wood and lily pads, with this inline style with these single hooks opposed to treble hooks. This style of bait bounces over heavy cover pretty well and can get in between those lily pads and pull some fish out of some pretty thick stuff, which is pretty cool. I don't see a lot of guys throwing an inline spinner bait, especially on the areas where I fish, but that's a very effective lure and definitely has a place in your tackle box. Alright, so let's talk about rods and reel setups and what's appropriate size tackle for this fishery that we have here in Illinois. Now, traditionally, when you see musky fishing tackle, you're looking at like a big 400 or 500 size bait casting reel, spooled up with 80-pound braid on a heavy action broomstick style rod. And that's appropriate size gear if you're throwing really big heavy lures like 8-9 ounce things, but that just simply is not necessary for the fishery that we have down here and is honestly complete overkill. You're going to have a lot more fun and be way more effective with a lighter outfit, something similar to what I have here. This is my most versatile setup, and it's really the rod and reel that I grab most when I'm going musky fishing. I have a 300 size Daiwa Alexa reel. That's spooled up with 65-pound braid, and that's paired on an 8-foot medium heavy power rod made by Fenwick. This rod is rated for 1 to 4 ounces and would have no problems throwing any of those lures that I just showed off. One of the reasons why I like this tackle is, one, it's physically lighter. I can fish with it all day long with no issues compared to that traditional heavier tackle. And the other thing, and the more important thing, is it's more forgiving. By having a rod with a lighter action, it loads up better. Muskie are notorious for jumping and being maniacs and shaking hooks, and giving an angler some heartbreak. By having a lighter action rod like this, the rod just loads up better. And when the fish does choose to jump around and be a maniac, the bend in the rod provides a lot more forgiveness than a stiff, heavy broomstick will, resulting in more fish in the net and a happier Louie. Anyway, that's pretty much the rod and reel setup that I use. Hopefully you found some of this information helpful. I mean, I know there was no fish actually being caught in this video, but it wasn't really the goal. I wanted to provide some sort of educational content to either help you guys catch your first muskie or be more consistent with the ones that you do catch. And if you found any of that information helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you guys helped me out with a like, share, subscribe. I don't know, all that YouTube stuff I'm supposed to ask for that I'm really not very good at asking for. But if you felt like helping me out, I'd certainly appreciate it. That being said, if you made it this far, I'd love to see you in the next video as well, where we're back on the water, actually catching some fish.